But first we are going to listen about streaming data transformations with Ruby, and we have a Finnish guy here, Ville Lautanala. It's your turn, and see you 1:45.
Hi, I'm Ville Lautanala, or if you happen to run into me on the internet, I usually go by the handle Lautis. The topic for this lightning talk is streaming data transformations with Ruby. To give an example of what I'm talking about, I might want to download a web page, decompress it, and count the number of characters on the page. On terminal, this is rather simple to do, using curl to fetch the page, piping the output to gzip, and then piping that to word count to get the number of characters. And on the example page, we have roughly 132,000. And as you can see, we can add more of these steps if needed, and things kind of get together. And the best part of this is that this is streaming, so even if the page would be terabytes in size, it would work, maybe take a bit longer time, but wouldn't consume all my available memory. So how hard can it be to implement something like this in Ruby? Well, not too hard, but at least my first trial kind of ended up in a bit of a mess. It does work, but it's a bit of a like spaghetti where things are coupled together, and mainly because there is this gzip decoder that needs to be then finalized to free up the resources, so that kind of made it harder to decompose the functionality into smaller pieces. It's not a problem that much with the simple pipeline that I have, but what if I would have more steps in the streaming pipeline? Then it wouldn't be acceptable anymore, and I would need to figure out a way to decompose it. So back to the drawing board. How could this be improved? Well, taking inspiration from the terminal script, I thought of having this idea of a pipeline with steps, where each of the step is a lambda function that returns an enumerable, and then just compose those things together. For good measure, the page URL or the input for the first pipeline could be given as the function call, so that when the pipeline is initialized, I can change the page URL if I need to. And this is all in the piperator gem that I implemented. The HTTP fetch is not that interesting, pretty much same as before. For the decompression part, because I really wanted to use the zlib gzip reader, I needed to implement this IO wrapper for enumerators, so that I could pass in the enumerator for the gzip reader as an argument. And the length is pretty uninteresting Ruby code. So my original goal for this talk was that maybe now that Mats is in the audience, and I hope listening to this talk, I could pitch the idea that we could have something like this in Ruby. But to not make a fool out of myself, I thought it would be a good idea to check that is there something like this in the latest Ruby versions, because I have not been writing that much Ruby in the past 2 years. And turns out that at least for the pipeline part, there is. So since Ruby 2.7, you could have written it out using the function composition operator and get pretty much the same code as before. But the enumerator IO part is still valid, so maybe to make my gem really redundant, could we please have an enumerator IO object in Ruby, just like we have a string IO? Maybe something we could consider for future Ruby versions, because otherwise I think this is a pretty neat way of composing streaming data pipelines together. And I can also show that it actually works. So if I run the command or script, I get the exact same outputs as before. And thank you for your attention, and have a really nice Euruko.